Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Ayman Nazir and welcome to Knowledge Realm. So students, in the previous lecture we studied the theory of realism, that is the most important theory of IR. Today students, we're going to cover the history of theory of realism. We studied the assumptions of realism in detail in the previous lecture, but a question came to our mind that from where did these assumptions come? And who designed these assumptions? So today we're going to find the answer of this question by studying the history of theory of realism. So stay focused and let's get started. Students, realism is not a new concept actually. It has been in existence since the existence of permanent settlements of human. Conflicts and war has been part of human history. Scholars have been writing on conflict, war, struggle of power, survival, and selfish nature of human being since the existence of permanent settlements of human. Now, all these ideas have been in existence since the existence of settlements of human, and all these ideas are similar to the theory of realism. So we can say that yes, the theory of realism has existed since the existence of settlements of human. But the ancient scholars, they did not give a name to this philosophy. They did not give a name to this kind of thinking and these ideas that the selfish nature of human beings, struggle for power, survival, and conflict and war, all these things. They did not give a name to this theory. Realism actually got its name after failure of idealism in 1938. E.H. Carr, who is a realist, he wrote the book The 20-Year Crisis, 1919 to 1939, and then he asserted that international relations cannot be based on utopian approaches such as idealism, because after World War I, Woodrow Wilson, who was the president of America at the time, he presented a new ideology that was called idealism, and as the name suggests, it was a very utopian approach and it was named idealism, and it was an approach to resolve the conflicts between the states of the world, and it was an approach to prevent the war because the world had seen World War I already, and the people of the world at the time did not want any other war like World War. So Woodrow Wilson, he gave the idea idealism. But idealism failed and another war broke out in the world, that is World War II. That was far more heinous than World War I. So idealism failed in 1938, and then E.H. Carr came to the front, and he asserted that international relations cannot be based on such kind of utopian approaches such as idealism. So he said that there is a need of some realistic approach, and he gave name to this approach, and people started calling this approach realism. But students, we have studied the assumptions of realism, and we would see today that the realist scholars actually started drawing their political thought on the political thoughts of ancient philosophers such as Thucydides, Nicola Machiavelli, and Thomas Hobbes. All the assumptions of realism that we study today, these are not new, but these are old, and this is actually a very ancient political thought of scholars such as Thucydides, Nicola Machiavelli, and Thomas Hobbes. And now students, this thing shows that realism is a very, very old concept, and it has been in existence since the existence of permanent settlements of human. But those scholars who studied this and who proposed this in the ancient times, such as Thucydides, Niccolò, Machiavelli, and Thomas Hobbes, they wrote about this and they gave this philosophy, but they were not able to give a name to this philosophy. The name was given after 1938, and the name was realism. So today, students, we're going to study the philosophies of these ancient philosophers such as Thucydides, Nicola Machiavelli, and Thomas Hobbes, and we would compare the political thoughts of these ancient philosophers with the theory of realism that we study today. So it's going to be very interesting. So first of all, we would study the Thucydides view of the world and politics. Well, Thucydides was from Greek Empire, Greek city-state system, and he wrote the book, The History of the Peloponnesian Wars, 431 BC. Peloponnesian War was actually a war between Athens and Sparta of Greek at the time. And by studying this book, scholars realized that Thucydides actually presented a realist view in this book. And he was a realist philosopher. His view was a realist. Now, his view of the world based on the following assumptions. First of all, he believed on the human selfish nature. He said, strong does what it can and weak suffer what it must. Now, here, Thucydides is actually alluding towards this very first assumption of realism, that is human selfish nature. Thucydides is saying that strong does what it can. The strong is selfish. A strong wants power acquisition. A strong wants power maximization. So strong does what it can. Strong does not care about the other people. Strong does not care about the weak people. Strong does what it can and weak suffer what it must. Now, here students, by this quote, just try to understand that Thucydides is actually alluding towards the human selfish nature and the international anarchic system also. Thucydides is trying to say that strong can do whatever it wants and weak would suffer because there is no one to stop the strong. There is no supra-sovereign authority. So this shows that he believes in the anarchic system of the world. Then the second assumption, human desire to dominate, an issue of survival and mistrust. He's saying, by necessary law of nature, men rule wherever it can. And it is not as if we are the first to make this law or to act upon it when made. We found it existing before us. All we do is to make use of it, knowing that you and everybody else having the same power would do the same as we do. Now, this is actually a message from the strong to the weak. From those who were fighting the Peloponnesian War. Now, what Thucydides is trying to say here, Thucydides is saying that this is the law of nature, that man rules wherever it can, and this law was passed to us, and we are not doing something new. And he is saying that we know that if you had this power, the weak. Thucydides is saying that if you had this power, you would do the same as we do. So Thucydides is saying that human has the desire to dominate and there is an issue of survival and mistrust. Then his assumption is human pursuit of power. He's saying that human always wants power, and Athens fought wars with Sparta to maximize their power. Then there is another concept that Thucydides gave, that is Thucydides trap. Thucydides trap is actually the fear of rising power in the established power. He believes that when a state tries to accumulate power, tries to maximize power, it inculcates a fear in the established power, and the established power starts fearing the overthrowing of this power. He says that the growth in the power of Athens and the fear it inspired in Sparta led to the war between them. So students, just try to make understanding of the view of Thucydides. Thucydides believed in human selfish nature. Thucydides believed that yes, there is a mistrust, there is a pursuit of power. Human tries to maximize its power, and there is an issue of survival. If a state does not maximize its power, it would be overthrown and it would be invaded by some other state who has more power than this. So there is an issue of survival and mistrust, and there is an issue of pursuit of power and human selfish nature, and all these were the view of Thucydides. Now, just try to compare this with the modern realist theory. Didn't we study all this in the previous lecture when we were studying realism? Yes, we studied this, and it shows that Thucydides was actually a realist, and his view was realist, and it shows that realism is a very, very old concept, and the scholars of 431 BC also give this kind of philosophies. Now students, let's study the worldview of Nicola Machiavelli, who was a scholar of 16th century from Italy. We're going to study The Prince, written by Nicola Machiavelli. The Prince was actually a series of letters to the Prince of Italy at the time, and in these letters Nicola Machiavelli actually gave some advices to the Prince of Italy, and these letters depict the realist perception of Nicola Machiavelli. These letters show that Nicola Machiavelli was also a realist, and his philosophy was based on the realist theory of fire that we study today. So what did Nicola Machiavelli believe in? First of all, he believed in selfish and hypocritical nature of mankind. He said, of mankind, we may say in general, they are fickle, hypocritical, and greedy of gain. Now this is the first assumption of realism, selfish human nature. Then he said, in politics, we must act as all men are wicked, and that they must give a vent to their malignity that is in their mind when opportunity offers. Now here, Nicola Machiavelli is trying to say that all men are wicked, and we must trust this thing in politics. Then Nicola Machiavelli advised Prince that Prince should not obey the conventional religious morality. Now here, the Nicola Machiavelli is actually trying to teach the prince that you should go for power maximization, and for power maximization, you should do whatever you can. Nicola Machiavelli is saying, obey the ethics of responsibility rather than the conventional religious morality that guides the average citizen. That is, they should be good when they can, but they must also be willing to use violence when necessary to guarantee the survival of the state. Here, Nicola Machiavelli is actually trying to say that morality is nothing in the matters of a state, and you should be selfish, you should be deceitful, and you should not be moral, because if you be moral, you would not be able to run the matter of the state. So here he is just trying to encourage the selfish nature of the prince, because he believed in realism and he believed that there is an international anarchic system. Now another idea that comes from this quote of Prince is of international anarchic system. What he's trying to say, he's saying that don't obey the ethics of responsibility, don't obey the conventional religious morality, rather obey the ethics of responsibility, because there is an anarchy in the world and no one would come to save you and no one would stop the persecutor. So just obey the ethics of responsibility. Then another assumption, prince should be deceitful to maximize power. He's saying that a prince should maximize power at all cost. Now this is the assumption of realism that we study today. He's saying never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. Then he's saying prince should maintain its fear to keep hold on its empire. He's saying since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. Students, we have studied the whole idea of Nicola Machiavelli that he presented in his letters to the Prince of Italy, the Prince in 1532 AD, and all the ideas of Nicola Machiavelli show that he was a realist and his ideas were realist. He believed in selfish and hypocritical nature of mankind. He advised Prince to obey the ethics of responsibility. He is advising Prince to be deceitful to maximize power, and he is advising Prince that you should maintain your fear to keep hold on your empire. Now all these views are of realist scholars whole idea revolves around selfish and hypocritical nature of human and power maximization of prince. Now it shows that Nicola Machiavelli was also a realist and his ideas were also realist. Now students, the third and last realist scholar of ancient history, Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes actually lived in 17th century, and it was the time when there was a civil war in Europe, and he saw this kind of civil war. He saw a very bad side of human. He saw a very bad time in his life, and then he became a realist. His ideas became a realist because he lived in civil war. He saw civil war. He saw a very, very cruel face of human, and he wrote a book, Leviathan, in 1651. So what were his ideas? He believed that all men are equal in the world, and these men, they interact in anarchy. All men are equal in power and they interact in anarchy. There is no one to protect the people, and there is no one to stop the persecutor. There is no one to stop the cruel, the brutal men of the world. He believed that men are driven by competition, diffidence, and glory. And he believed that the conjunction of these conditions lead to a state of war of all against all. He believed that in civil war there is a war of all against all because there is anarchy. There is no one to protect people. There is no one to prevent the brutal from inflicting atrocities on the people, and there is no one to stop this fighting. So he believed that we are in a state of war against all, and his view was realist. His view of anarchy was realist. He believed that man lives in a state of nature where there is a war of all against all. A state of nature means that a state of anarchy. By state of nature, he meant a state of anarchy and a state of absence of government. Because in civil war, we all know that there is no government. So he saw the civil war and he believed that man lives in a state of nature. And a state of nature means a state of anarchy, a state of absence of government. And when there is an absence of government, there is a war of all against all. He said, life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short in state of nature. And he believed that this logic of conflict can be evaded only if one or more of the model's assumptions either does not hold or is counterbalanced by other forces. Now, what were his assumptions? First of all men are equal and they interact in anarchy. Then men are driven by competition, diffidence, and glory. Then man lives in a state of nature. He says that if one or more of this model's assumption either does not hold or is counterbalanced by other forces, if we counterbalance any of this assumption, we would be in a state of peace, and this state of nature would be eliminated. Now, if we study and if we analyze the assumptions of Thomas Hobbes, we would realize that Thomas Hobbes was also a realist because he believed that humans are equal and they are in a war of all against all. What does it mean? It means that he's trying to say that humans are selfish, they are greedy, and they fight with each other, and they are in a state of war of all against all. And he was trying to say that we are living in a state of anarchy and we interact in anarchy. Now, all these assumptions are actually similar to the concept of realism that we study today. So it shows that Thomas Hobbes was also a realist, and he wrote all these things in his book Leviathan. Students, we have studied the political thoughts of the ancient scholars such as Thucydides, Nicola Machiavelli, and Thomas Hobbes. Now let's just conclude this analysis. What did we realize by studying these political thoughts? We realized that realism is actually based on the political thoughts of scholars from ancient times. These scholars were Thucydides, Nicola Machiavelli, and Thomas Hobbes. But they did not give a name to their political thought. They did not give a name to their philosophy. Realism got its name in 1939 after failure of idealism. People believed in this philosophy and people knew this philosophy even before this time, such as Thucydides, Nicola Machiavelli and Thomas Hobbes, but they did not give a clear name to this theory and they did not study this theory in detail. Today, in this century, there are scholars who study realism, and these scholars are called realist scholars, and the realism got its name in 1939 after failure of idealism. All realist scholars draw their political thought from these scholars: Thucydides, Nicola Machiavelli and Thomas Hobbes. Here you can see I've attached the picture of these two realist scholars. This is Dr. Hans Morgenthau. He wrote the very famous book Politics Among Nations. He was a realist, and he used to say that international politics, like all of the politics, is a struggle for power. Now here we have John Mearsheimer. He's a very famous structural realist, and let's see what John Mearsheimer says, and let's try to compare their thoughts with the thoughts of the ancient scholars that we study today. John Mearsheimer says, in an anarchic world of international politics, it is better to be Godzilla than Bombay. Students, just recall what we studied in the political thoughts of Nicola Machiavelli. Isn't it similar with the political thought of Nicola Machiavelli? Nicola Machiavelli advised his prince to use force whenever he can. Nicola Machiavelli said that there is no need to obey the conventional religious morality. No, you are the prince of a country and you should be deceitful. You should use deception. So John Mearsheimer is also saying that we are living in an anarchic world of international politics. So it is better to be Godzilla than Bombay, because if we become Bombay, someone else would become Godzilla and would kill us. So John Mearsheimer actually drew his political thought on the political thought of Nicola Machiavelli. Then let's see what Hans Morgenthau is saying. Hans Morgenthau is saying that the universal moral principles cannot be applied to the actions of states. Once again, the assumption of Nicola Machiavelli, and once again the assumptions of Thucydides. Thucydides was saying that strong would do what it can and weak must suffer what it has to. Now Hans Morgenthau here is saying that states cannot do the actions of morality, and the universal moral principles cannot be applied to the actions of states. Then Hans Morgenthau is saying international politics, like all politics, is a struggle for power, and this is what Thucydides believed, and this is what Nicola Machiavelli believed, and this is what Thomas Hobbes believed in. Thomas Hobbes also said that all men are equal in power and they fight with each other. They are living in a state of war, that is a state of nature, a war of all against all, and he said that men interact with each other in a state of anarchy. So the concepts and the political thoughts of the realist scholars of this century, these political thoughts are similar to the political thoughts of the scholars of ancient time. So it shows that realism is not at all a new theory. Realism is the most old theory of IR. Well, today we have studied a lot, and I hope that all this makes sense now, and I hope that the question is clear now, the history of realism and from where we got these assumptions. And realism is the dominant theory of IR. It is the most old theory of IR, and this is the end of this lecture today. I hope you all got whatever I was trying to explain. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz. Don't forget to like, comment, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe the channel Knowledge Realm. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.